Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Nutty Professor 2, The Klumps. So, I of course went and reviewed the very first Nutty Professor film, and I was like, yeah, like the Nutty Professor doesn't really hold up. Like, really, there's just a lot of, like, not really tasteful jokes going on in that movie. So, like, I don't know, I just kept seeing that video just continued to progress, so it's like undeniable that it's like, well, let's roll the dice on the sequel. Like eventually it's just like a no-brainer to have just gone and just like, well, like I guess let's try this one. Let's go into this one. Like, let's see if this one holds up. Let's see if this one is to be fun. I actually really did have a fun time with this movie, because I think it like it does something different than its very first film. Plus, also it basically uh, everything that worked in the first film, they end up going back into this film to just make it that much more of a focus, or to put together some kind of better story. Even though like there's certain parts of this story that I just am like, oh yeah, like this is the goofy part of the film that I didn't care for, but there's some bits and pieces of this movie that you can have fun with and you can enjoy, and you can't help but also laugh also. Um, but laugh in a good way. And because I remember like the very first film, like I felt like if I were to laugh, I were to feel bad at some part of the film, just because reasonably, like a lot of the jokes are seemingly at a person's expense, where reasonably in the sequel film, like it just kind of feels like it's just good fun, where you can laugh at a number of things and just like it's really like a good movie, or a kind of a better movie as far as like the approach, but maybe not the main focuses of story. Which main focuses of story is to basically separate Sherman from Buddy in this movie, and some people might have uh, reservations that maybe they also can enjoy that too, or maybe people can just enjoy this whole entire movie, and I don't blame them for that. Um, like I just think that the main story, is to be so goofy, but like basically you get what you pay for, kind of like you should know that this movie is gonna get really goofy and really weird. Um, but also there are some some upping the antes also from the first film. Also, we really actually have these characters seemingly physically in one room with one another, and that's the thing that I like about this the most. Is really Eddie is to seemingly be sharing a screen with another personality of his, and it's not like some kind of double, or like it's not some tennis ball or something like that. You can like, uh, or like it's obviously someone looking at another person and they're like sharing the screen just because like they cut it the right way. Like no, like we end up having like at one point where Buddy Love is being in the same kind of room with uh, grandmother Klump, and so like that's what I liked about this movie, is it was just kind of like, okay, they're CGIing these characters in to actually mix them together, and it creates for like, okay, like they're really putting forth some real money into this one. And yeah, so the main stories of the sequel is that Sherman and Buddy are to separate. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go ahead and check out the Nutty Professor reviews. You can go ahead and see what I felt about the very first Nutty Professor film, and probably going more in depth about possibly Buddy Love, or possibly really Sherman. Uh, I think the only kind of thing that like I probably might have a problem with is like this movie obviously is to be called the Klumps, right? And so we kind of forget about the Nutty Professor thing. Like we like it seemed like Buddy Love had some kind of real personality in the first film, and it seemed like we got to know who that person was, and it seemed that we also got to know who Sherman was in the first film. And so they basically forgot all about that and just mainly focused on the family this time around, to where it's like, okay, so just really just Sherman and Buddy Love were just kind of there, and they were figuring out some way to eventually get a story together and try to figure out how they can continue to focus so much more so on the Klumps than actually either Sherman or Buddy Love itself. And I was like, okay, so uh, like that just kind of just is one thing about the movie where it's like, okay, like so the characters are so strongly to be put into that you kind of forget who's kind of really to be the character that's like to be the supposed still focus here, because like it's kind of like Major League, where it seemed that uh like in the first Major League film, like the focus was on like all the players, and that it seemed that everybody got some really good like screen time, and then all of a sudden we in Major League Two, all of a sudden they like focus way too much on Charlie Sheen's character, and then like they kind of pitter patter and kind of like kind of drop in some other players from the first film, and but the main focus is on Charlie Sheen. And so it's like, okay, so like this kind of fits that kind of same similar formula um where it's basically like focused mainly on the Klumps, but like have kind of like Sherman kind of in and out at some points to kind of tell us where we're going to head into this story. So some people might disagree with me with that. That's perfectly okay, because at the end of the day, it's a review. More than likely, if I were to ever watch this movie again, I might feel drastically differently, because times will change and whichever. And all of a sudden, a movie that I was just like, meh, like I might be like, ah. So who knows? So I would say that this is like a fun film compared to the original, where it was kind of like a sad, depressing film. This is much more fun, even though the story is just so goofy, and I'm just like, I just don't care about the story. Give me some more of them Klumps. Give me some more. Give me some more of this family. Um, joke around a little bit more. Um, but yeah, but I can be okay with the sequel. Um, yeah. So let's go into that double five time territory, because it's customary to otherwise say it's spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time I'm going to spoil this movie. So, because I think like the first time around, like I mentioned that reasonably, it's like that the first movie didn't hold up, and like really it was kind of like some kind of like thing that kind of made me uncomfortable to watch, where like this sequel like didn't ever get me to be uncomfortable to watch it. So I think that's where like I was kind of interested in going into the sequel, because there was bits and pieces of it where it's like, okay, they mainly focus on the family and they go through goofy adventures. So that's why I kind of was to latch onto the sequel, not because I was like, oh well, like I wasn't really staying true to what I was saying in the Nutty Professor film, um, or the Nutty Professor review. Like it was just like funny movie, maybe. Let's check it out. From what I remembered, so let's go into spoilers. So the very beginning of the movie is to have Sherman going through this dream sequence where he is to go off and to get married, to all of a sudden have, of course, uh, the grandmother like coming in on this like scooter, and so everybody's like kind of getting ready for this wedding. We have like the mother Klump who's eventually kind of singing this choir. So the wedding is to go on, and so what ends up happening is all of a sudden uh, Sherman is to seemingly have what is to seemingly look like a big old stiffy, a big old bone, if you know what I'm saying. He has a boner. It looks like he has a boner. And so all of a sudden Sherman is freaking out because he's like, whoa, like what's going on? And so we, of course, have Cletus who's like, yeah, that's my son. And so all of a sudden, we end up thinking like some weird and into the gutter thoughts. But then all of a sudden, this head is to actually come out of Sherman's pants, and it's to be a head of Buddy Love and not a head of what we are to assume. So all of a sudden, like Buddy is like, yeah, like you didn't think I'd be back. So all of a sudden, like Sherman is to try to shove this head back into his body, and all of a sudden legs start popping out the back of Sherman, and so eventually, what ends up happening is that Buddy Love comes from out of the backside of Sherman, and then Sherman ends up falling over, and Denise ends up passing out, and so Buddy Love grabs Denise before she ends up falling over, and then Buddy Love is like, "Yeah, you didn't think I'd be back, chunky butt," or whatever. He ends up like Goofy having to like make jokes about Sherman and whatever. So all of a sudden, we end up finding out that Sherman is to be in uh, this therapy session talking about this dream and how this Buddy Love character is to interrupt his dreams all the time and like ruin every one of his happy moment dreams. And so we have this guy called Dr. Null who is to eventually try and do this therapy session. And funny enough, like this therapist is actually to be like the go-to therapist actor because of course he was to be this like therapist guy in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. And so like he's trying to therapize Sherman, and so eventually what Buddy Love is to like start to realize is that because the doctor is like, well, maybe this is just something like you're gonna have to just deal with. Maybe you're just gonna have to like realize that like you're in charge and you're the dominant of this other character that you hold with you. So just kind of like be in charge and just like to like try to keep control of your body. So all of a sudden we have Sherman going off feeling good because he's like, I'm in charge. And so eventually he starts to go throughout class or go throughout his campus, and we really just find out that he's not quite as in charge as he would like to be because he's to be going and looking at some people and just insulting them, and then all of a sudden he's looking at this like this beautiful woman, and he ends up just like thrust in with this briefcase and he's like, yeah. And so Sherman is to realize how not quite in control he really is. And so Sherman goes off to eventually be at Denise's projectional speech thing class, whichever. And so eventually, like, Sherman is to just kind of take up like the shadow or whatever of the projector's like viewing thing, and so Denise is to realize that Sherman is there, and she's like, "Oh, hey!" And so all of a sudden, Sherman is to have picked up what Denise is talking about, and he ends up making a joke, and she ends up going like, "Ha ha ha!" She ends up laughing, and so we are to, I guess, immediately just see that these two characters do have a rapport with one another, but we're not quite sure how far. Like it kind of feels like these people have been like seemingly like a friends for a while, but we just don't quite understand like the jump from eventually there being a proposal here. It seems quite early, but like if these two seemingly have chemistry with one another compared to any other people. So, anyways, pushing on. Uh, so eventually, what is to happen further on in this movie is that Sherman is going to want to try and propose to Denise, and because it seems like Denise easily goes along with the Klump family, and it seems that she easily fits into this family. She ends up going to dinner with them, and so there's plenty of times where within this dinner scene that the grandma Klump is to have, I guess, a new stallion in her stable. Let's just say she ends up having a, I guess, man of her own. She's like, man. And so we have this dinner with this family, and so uh, really what kind of goes down within this, of course, like meal that they are to be having at this restaurant, which always ends up going down to it being like Cletus versus like Grandma Klump. They always have this argument between one another, and supposedly this time around, because Grandma Klump is going on and on and on about her new man's libido, and so all of a sudden, like Cletus is like, nobody want to hear that. Nobody, like, come on, nobody wants to hear that. So all of a sudden, to fire back Grandma Klump is to mention that Cletus has a limp noodle, and that's why he really doesn't want to hear anything about an older man having a much more stronger libido than he does. And so Cletus all of a sudden looks at his wife, and he's like, "What? Like, how could you have like told her that?" And so Grandma's like, "Yeah, like get back at you, yeah." So, so of course Cletus is upset, and so, but they like. Here's the thing. So the wife ends up continuing to like tell people about Cletus's limp noodle, and so that just gets Cletus more and more upset because everybody's to know like really how much of a limp noodle, I guess, Cletus is to supposedly have. So, and eventually we get to the moment where both of them are kind of talking, and so the mother Klump is to mention to like Cletus, it's like, well, hey, like, have you ever like thought about like taking Viagra? And he's like, dude, I take them like M&Ms. It's nothing. Like, I can't do anything with that. So, uh, like eventually, like the mother Klump is kind of like seeing if they could kind of go into any kind of adjustments that they could possibly make to eventually have Cletus kind of get his manhood back. But eventually we'll get to there, which is going to be the only way of which that I guess Cletus can eventually find his manhood. So weirdly enough in the story. So yeah, so uh, we easily have really just uh, Denise fitting well with this family. I think at one point they end up kind of dining out, uh, and so uh, Sherman's brother ends up going and grabbing for a piece of Denise's chicken, and she ends up like slapping him away and like, hey, if you come at me again, you're gonna pull back a nub. It's like, hey, chicken. Anyways, so Chicken. Anyways, so uh, but pushing on. So Sherman decides that he wants to try and propose to Denise because everybody's like, well, yeah, like he should like obviously do this. Like it's the right time, and so because Sherman is to talk to Jason and mention that like uh, there were several things that he thought he could like deal with the way that his size is, like getting used to like being heavier, getting used to any number of things. But like he realized that he no longer wants to be alone, and I'm like, wow, that's just kind of really nice to where like Sherman has that opportunity to no longer be alone. And so him eventually going off and proposing to Denise is that way to eventually just realize that he had found the one for himself and he doesn't want to let Denise get away. So Sherman goes off, and so he is to seemingly perform like a Romeo and Juliet kind of thing, and to go and have these mariachi guys behind him. And so Sherman is to try and serenade Denise and then propose to her. And so Denise is to get from out of her apartment or her building, and so all of a sudden Sherman is to be talking about these things and to like just be whining and dining Denise with romance as the mariachi band is kind of repeating whatever uh, Sherman is to say. And then all of a sudden Sherman starts to shift into buddy love, and what is to be Sherman who is going to try to ask Denise for her hand. Instead, Sherman is to be asking for them to uh, have him put his meat in her taco, and in all kinds of other kind of acts of such. And so then all of a sudden Denise is like, ah. But then Sherman was trying to correct it, course correcting. He's like, no, 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 no. Like I just mean, like, are you hungry? Like I'm sorry. Like, and so Denise is like, no, I'm not. Like I might be hungry, but no, I'm sorry. Like no. So eventually Sherman just blew that opportunity, and so now like after that moment of just almost having his life ruined, and how Sherman is to consistently live in fear by seeing Buddy Love's shadow wherever he is to walk, like walk into like any kind of glass or mirror, and he ends up seeing like Buddy Love kind of looking back at him. Sherman now finally decides to separate both Sherman from Buddy Love, and so he ends up separating it by releasing some liquid that is to seemingly be a gene of Buddy. And so evidently Buddy is to not become an actual real person without the help of some kind of DNA. Coincidentally, Buddy is to eventually find that DNA by eventually this dog kind of knocking things over, and eventually creating Buddy Love, but with a slight twist because now he has all these kind of mimicking things of a dog, weirdly enough, which I'm like, okay, they could have gone without that, but it's whatever. So before Sherman is to split himself from Buddy Love, Sherman is to come up with this Fountain of Youth like potion, and eventually they are to test it onto this dog and turn him into a puppy. And so, but I guess that this like potion is to be a limited time thing, because it seems that eventually these things that end up trying to create the Fountain of Youth end up eventually changing back to the way it is. I'm like, well, like, is it just gonna be that, like, would this be a permanent solution, or will it just be like a temporary thing for you to relive your youth for X amount of time. So it seems that the Dean Richmond is to have eventually find a buyer for this Fountain of Youth potion, and so the dean ends up giving Sherman this massive check that is probably mostly going to go to the campus, and maybe he might see like a small fraction of that, but I highly doubt it. So when eventually Buddy Love is to come to and kind of check really just Sherman's pockets, he ends up finding this check. I'm like, ooh, like Sherman must have come up with something that got to get this kind of money. So, and it must have been the Fountain of Youth potion, which we find out that Sherman is to go and take this concoction and put it into the refrigerator of the Klumps. So like they have this garage where they have this refrigerator, and so Sherman's like, hey, can I leave this here so that way no one else gets to it? And of course, like Cletus is just like, okay, sure. So like no one's gonna probably come in here and be looking for that. So but Cletus knows that the youth formula is there. So eventually what ends up happening is slowly but surely, after Sherman is to separate from of course Buddy Love, Sherman starts to lose his intelligence. And so all of a sudden we have to create every bit of story that is to come up with Sherman really having to use his intelligence, and since he is to be lacking in that department, like slowly but surely, he is to eventually just kind of like trip over his feet, so to speak, because like he doesn't know any better because he's losing his intelligence. So there's to be this one spot where Sherman is to eventually go to see Denise's family, and the first thing we end up seeing is that Sherman ends up forgetting to zip up his fly, and so eventually there is to be some accident where Sherman is to accidentally like have his thing of corn going flying to hit this one bird, and so Sherman is to try to check on the bird and drags the whole entire table of this dinner along with him. And so he's like, oh, I'm sorry, like I didn't mean to do that. So but eventually what ends up happening is Sherman also is to use these fireflies and to use this spray into the air to ask Denise to marry him. And Denise, of course, says, like, of course, yes. So, but she doesn't know what's going on. And Sherman is almost at some point when he is to consistently keep losing his intelligence, he is to realize that maybe it was a mistake to eventually marry Denise, because Denise probably only really loved Sherman because of his intelligence. So Denise is to go off with Sherman's mom and to try on her wedding dress. And so she ends up coming out with these like big bows and like this big lavish dress, and like she's kind of tripping over it and whichever. And so like eventually like Denise is just like, you know what, like I think this will be just fine to eventually go and do this whole dress. But I think that eventually whenever there's to be these wedding sequences and whichever, like Denise is wearing a different dress. So probably didn't completely go along with it, so to speak. I don't know. So uh so what eventually ends up happening is Sherman ends up deciding that since he's going to lose his intelligence, that he is going to break off the engagement with Denise. And so Sherman is off just being sad and lonely again. And like his mother is just like, oh my God, like why won't he tell me like why he broke it off with Denise? Like Denise is like perfect for him. And so like eventually we have this moment where both Cletus and the mother are to get so much closer because what ended up happening earlier, which I'm going to talk about now. So Cletus is to go on and try to like recapture his youth by finding the Fountain of Youth formula and drink it, and then eventually he goes out in the nightlight and freaking boogies and gets down with his bad self, and then ends up getting beaten up by some much older man, even though he's young. And so let me reset here for a second. All right. So, Cletus is to, of course, try to recapture his youth, and all of a sudden, when he is to be a young man, changing back into seemingly the much older Cletus, we end up having Buddy Love, who ends up catching this, and to all of a sudden realize, like, okay, well, Sherman must have not come up with some kind of unique spot for this. He must have just went and just had the youth potion just hiding out in the Klumps home. So we have Buddy who ends up scrambling to the Klumps home, and supposedly Denise is having a bachelorette party, which I'm like, okay, cool. We'll probably have, from what I remember here, they play around with like strippers and stuff like that, and I'm like, oh yeah, of course they do. Like, there's always to be seemingly like a bachelorette kind of movie where eventually there is some kind of there's never the one time where someone's gonna be like, oh no, strippers, and then they don't do strippers or something like that. Like, there's always strippers at some bachelor party. It's a go-to thing. Like, I don't know how many movies that they like cater to eventually having a stripper at a bachelor party. And then there have been some movies where eventually, like, there's to be a group of guys who end up having a bachelor party, and they have, like, the stripper, and she, like, I think she accidentally dies for whatever reason. And so the guys end up going and, like, why am I even talking about this? It's a very dark film. They end up burying the body, and then they have to kind of question if anybody else is gonna like tell the story or confess or whatever, and so that becomes a whole story. Why did I go into this? It's so weird to try to go into this here, but like, it just popped up into my brain. Weirdly enough, I don't know why. Maybe someone will go check out that movie, or check out the Tom Hanks bachelor party movie pushing on. So I have too many movies rattling in my head, and so reasonably that's why I always spew out this knowledge, this random knowledge that no one ever deserved to learn. Meaning that, or nobody wanted to know this knowledge, but I somehow have it. That's what I really meant. Like everyone deserves to learn anything that I are to tell them, but whatever. Anyways, pushing on. That went weird. So Cletus is, Buddy Love is trying to break into the Sherman house, trying to find where this concoction is. Mainly going through the bathrooms, like thinking that it's going to just be in some medicine cabinet somewhere. And so, Grandma Klump just thinks that all of a sudden the stripper had gone into the home, and so she ends up going like, give me some of that. So she ends up heading into the bathroom to realize that evidently this guy isn't to be a stripper-themed, or a firefighter-themed stripper, and is instead, like, I guess, a burglar. So Buddy Love plays that up, and he's like, yeah, I'm a burglar. I'm a cat prowler. Yeah, like so. Buddy Love continues to try to keep Grandma Klump at bay by telling her things that eventually he needs to go to find some juice, and so the only juice that is to be available is in the other fridge, and so Buddy Love goes out there to try to steal the potion from Klump and then adjust it a little bit. And then all of a sudden, Grandma Klump is like, okay, I ain't waiting no more. So all of a sudden, Grandma Klump is to go and lip lock with Buddy Love. And, like, that's not all that she's really wanting. Because eventually she ends up, like, breaking away her clothes and she's like, yeah, like, I want you too. Like, and then, like, just sort of, like, and so eventually Buddy Love is just so traumatized by all that, and it's kind of funny because he's basically kissing himself technically, but uh, so Buddy Love ends up running out of the garage, and he's just like barfing heavily into this bush, and so he's like running off, just like like licking his wounds and like getting out of there. So like I don't want to focus anything at all about the whole dog parts and pieces, but there's going to be one thing that I have to go and mention eventually when we come down for this story is the whole ball thing. So we'll have like because I just want to avoid that goofy part of the story, which I don't really enjoy. Um, oh, there was also the kind of interesting part where both Sherman and Denise were going to the movie theater, and all of a sudden, like Buddy Love is to make fun of the actors that are to be in that movie, and so all of a sudden, like Sherman and Denise are trying to be like, "Hey, man, like keep it down," and all of a sudden, uh, we end up finding out that of course is Buddy Love, and he reveals himself like, "Hey, chunk of butt," and whatever. It's just like, "Hey, like there's some women that have some chunky butts, and you know what? Like they look pretty dang good. Like if 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 a woman is to have the name chunky butt for whatever reason, it's because she looks good. You know what I'm saying? She worked. She did the work, so to speak, or whatever." But I guess for Eddie Murphy's character, I guess it doesn't quite work out. So, anyways, pushing on. Why do I say these things? Why do I go? I don't know. Maybe it's about that ninth hour of whatever, where all of a sudden it just gets weird. So we're getting there. So, uh, so pushing on. So eventually, Buddy Love is to go with the same people that are to offer Sherman this offer, and Buddy Love is like, "Well, hey, like I have this whole thing right here. Like, um, what Sherman has is some kind of like knockoff, or it's not the right thing." And so eventually, what ends up happening is that Sherman goes and does this presentation of this thing, and he ends up, of course, using it on this hamster. I'm like, I'm sorry, I remember seeing the first one all that well, and anything to do with the hamster just doesn't work out, or is just going to, like, you're gonna regret that whole scene with whole hamsters. Like, I remember some hamster goes flying into some woman's mouth. It was weird and ridiculous. So, and I was like, man, again, they went with hamster stuff again in the sequel. What is with them with hamsters? I don't know what it is, but anyways, like I guess they find it funny for whatever reason to just like, but I guess it's also just like, well, we want to keep the same pattern as the first movie and have some kind of hamster side effect thing going on. So anyways, we of course also have one point where Sherman is to talk to Buddy Love and ask like, "Hey, Buddy, do you have any like weird side effects like about you? Like, do you like is something not seem as normal as it used to be kind of thing?" And so like Buddy Love is to not really answer that and just kind of like just push off. Uh, and and I also didn't cover all the Cletus stuff. Crap. Uh, so yeah, let's finish up the Cletus stuff. So Cletus goes and is to keep using this youth formula, and he wants to use it in the bedroom with his wife. So he is to kind of try to put all the lights dark, and so like then we have like the wife who's all getting excited. She's like, like yeah, like getting some romance, you know. So Cletus all of a sudden takes his youth potion and then is to jump into bed with his wife, but then all of a sudden, like his wife is like, "Dude, I ain't gonna be jumping in bed with you." Like, no, like so she gets so frustrated because Cletus is to try to become younger or try to like be different, and so the mother Klump is to just tell Cletus to just get out of the bed and go and sleep in the couch because like he's in the doghouse because basically uh really uh we also had Cletus who's to like try and tell like his wife like, well, hey, maybe you can take the youth potion too, we can both be young, uh and the wife is just like, no, like I don't want to do anything of that, like no, like I'm not gonna try to drink some magic concoction to try and like change who we are. No, like we should be fine the way we are now. So and eventually that's kind of when they kind of like eventually Mother Clump eventually needs a shoulder to cry on, and Cletus is the one that's there. And so eventually Cletus is to go and talk or try to talk with uh, eventually Sherman, and like kind of give him the idea about having having Buddy and him like combine back together somehow or another. And Sherman is like, "Oh, well, I'll just eat him. Like that's what I'll do. I'll just consume him." And Cletus is like, "You be eating who? Consuming what now?" So but anyway, so now that we have that underway and that's done, let's go back to the science experiment that goes horribly awry. So Sherman is, of course, to barely be able to talk and kind of mention all the stuff that he is supposed to have to say, but he messes up the kind of the draw of it all. So Sherman goes off and just gives this hamster this formula. So at first, hamster ends up becoming young and starts humping away at its other hamster, and he's like, well, yeah, I guess nature. Like, so, but all of a sudden we end up having this hamster who grows enormous in size, like a Godzilla size for hamster size, I guess. So, which is almost the size of like a very large human. So all of a sudden everybody's like, oh my god, this is like Godzilla. So everybody's like running off. And so all of a sudden we have Dean, the Dean, who is to eventually get a butt full of hamster, so to speak, sadly enough. So, like, hey, man, if you get paid pretty well. That seemed like a weird... Why did I say that? If you get paid really well... No, never. Not on your life. But hey, like, if... if what is seemed to go on is to get really big fat check for humiliation and whatever, then maybe then maybe you'll never like regret that decision again. But really, just like that doesn't mean do anything for money, kids. Anyways, pushing on. Why I regret that now. Oh well, it's too late to take it back. Pushing on. But eventually it just goes, and all of a sudden, like the Dean is to see the hamster, and the hamster's winking at him later on in the movie, and the Dean is like, "Nah, I could do worse." so it's like, so anyways, so the experiment goes horribly awry. The Dean ends up deciding that he's going to finally just fire Sherman. And so Sherman is to be more focused on going and reconnecting with Buddy. Denise is trying to figure out what the heck is going on because Sherman again is not telling her really anything, and uh, so Sherman goes off to the races to reconnect with Buddy. So uh, while Buddy is going off to try and get some big fat sack of cash, so eventually Sherman has come up with this concoction in the same lab that he was fired from. And so all of a sudden, the dean is spotting this. And so the dean is assuming that Sherman is going to take this youth formula without him. And he's like, oh no, like, you're not going to go and do that and try to, like, try to get this money off of it. No, that's not going to happen. So the dean follows Sherman to this place. Uh, And so what Sherman is trying to do is concoct this other youth formula so that way he can make Buddy so much more youthful so that way he ends up turning to a liquid so then Sherman can consume Buddy. So and we have Sherman who ends up taking this tennis ball with him. So going on, so Buddy Love is to of course do this experiment and basically have this old man there, and it's like, hey, nobody wants to hang out with this old man, but like, and nobody really cares about if he lives or dies or not. And the old man's like, well, I care. So, so Buddy is going to put together this experiment to show this whole formula working, and so Sherman ends up coming in and breaking all this up, and all of a sudden is to have Buddy forcibly playing catch because Sherman all of a sudden has this ball. He's like, hey, Buddy, look at this. Uh, so Sherman plays around with Buddy, and then eventually Sherman tosses the ball. Buddy grabs it and then realizes when he is to squeeze this ball tightly in his mouth, it is to also leak out the fluid of the youth formula. And so all of a sudden, Buddy Love comes from like normal Eddie Murphy size to all of a sudden this baby, and all of a sudden everybody's staring at a thing that they should not, of course. And so this baby is running off, let's just say. And so eventually what ends up happening is now Sherman is chasing after this baby. And so when this baby is to end up in this elevator, all of a sudden, like, the baby then changes into this liquid thing. And so now Buddy Love is now this liquid trying to make it through like these parts of the city, and Sherman is crazily chasing after it. So Buddy just narrowly makes it to this spot by this fountain, and so Denise, who is to go into Sherman's lab, is to find out information about Sherman that kind of answers all of her questions about what is going on with Sherman, and then so she ends up crazily trying to find where Sherman is to help him. And so by the time she does, it feels like all is lost. So, because when Sherman is to get to Buddy, like, he is to supposedly dissolve. And so Denise is to race after Sherman and just like, oh my God, do you know who I am? Like, do you know anything? And so Sherman is like, no. So, like, from what thing that he could say to eventually him just saying like pretty lady because he doesn't know. So Denise goes and hugs Sherman and is like, I'm gonna take care of you no matter what it takes. So all of a sudden Denise is crying, and all of a sudden so her tears is to go on the thing of dissolved Buddy Love and go into this fountain. And so all of a sudden the fountain just weirdly becomes Buddy Love now. And so Sherman is to mention like, hey, the fountain looks pretty, and so Denise makes the realization that, oh my god, like Buddy Love is bizarrely in the fountain, and so now we're having to pull off like the Dumbledore scenario where Denise is telling like Sherman to drink this water because evidently Buddy is within this water, uh, and so Sherman's like dirty water, but he continues to drink it anyways, and so Cletus is wanting to just speed this up, and so he just takes Sherman's head and just dunks it in here for as long as possible, and then just kind of pulls him out to where eventually it seems like he gets his faculties all back, and it seems like he has this knowledge back. So eventually they go off, and of course Denise and Sherman end up getting married, and everything works out, happy ending, and so on and so forth. And so yeah, like basically like happy ending and whichever for yeah. So yeah, I think that's all that I wanted to say about this movie. Fun film. There's some fun spots in here. Um like I liked just how they kind of tried to stay away of being like the first film. Like there's little references and stuff like that from the first film. There's probably a lot more fart jokes in this one compared to anything else. Like we have the one moment where Cletus to be choking on this one thing of food, and so Sherman ends up giving him the Heimlich, and then Cletus ends up farting and and like flaming up. I think somebody had like some birthday candle that ended up kind of like burning almost some part of this restaurant out. We also had the moment where like Sherman was falling asleep in front of the TV again and was to have this dream that he was to supposedly put this bomb on this asteroid, but instead he accidentally put this bomb on the moon, and so Sherman ends up accidentally wiping out the Earth because the asteroid hits Earth and kills it. Because like Sherman just kind of assumed like, oh, it probably didn't do all that much damage. Maybe it's going to hit in the ocean, and it's like, no, it wipes the whole thing out. So, but yeah, so and like Sherman ended up having to like use the Force, which is basically him just farting his way to hit the bomb detonator thing, but he accidentally hits the moon instead because supposedly he's the dumbest man on Earth that ends up bizarrely being able to be an astronaut. It's like, I'm sorry, wouldn't they have checked for IQ and not had this guy go and be an astronaut? But I guess that's just like, hey, like they had to do some kind of like Armageddon kind of thing in this movie for whatever reason. And so, like, and I think there might have been a lot of movies during that time where it was like, there was an asteroid that's hitting Earth, like, let's go and place this bomb. To protect the earth, and then I guess a misfire happens here or a farting happens here. So with that said, yeah, that's all I wanted to say about this movie. Hopefully I covered everything. There might have been a thing that kind of slipped my mind or whatever. um but yeah, like I think there was the only thing that I didn't mention was like the grandmother Klump and the mother Klump, like that whole like hairdresser scene. Like I love Wanda Sykes. Like I really love her comedy. I watched her variety show, and I watched her stand up, and so like and plus also I like seen her on like certain kind of like films and stuff like that eventually. Uh like Evan Almighty, she was in that. Like I see more than that with her in it, but still, that's the only thing that popped in my noggin. So yeah, I think that's all I wanted to cover. So I'm going to get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.